All right, it is the July 2020 Disability Ministry Video Roundtable from Key Ministry. Welcome. My name is Beth Golick from Key Ministry, and Catherine Boyle, our Director of Mental Health Ministry, is here as well. And we are here today because of a subject that we get asked a lot about at Key Ministry. And so we've brought Sandra Peoples on as well. Wave, Sandra. There you go. Okay, so really, actually, two things we're going to cover today. So one is intake forms and how to use those in your, like, let's say your Sunday morning special needs ministry. We're going to talk about that, see who's using them, share ideas. But we're also going to talk about a blog post that Sandra wrote recently, and that is on ISPs, the idea of ISPs, or Individualized Spiritual Plans, to use in your classrooms. So, and again, this is a discussion. We want to hear from everybody, hear what you're doing, hear what questions you have. But I think we're going to start with Sandra. So Sandra, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to write this blog post, and we can talk a little bit about the idea of ISPs.
Okay. Thank you for having me, Beth. It's always fun when we get to hang out, and I see lots of familiar faces. So it's going to be fun just to hang out with everybody for the next hour. I live outside of Houston, where my husband's a pastor at a Heights Baptist church, and I serve as the Special Needs Ministry Director. I have a son with autism who is 12, and I have a sister with Down syndrome who is my big sister. And she and my parents live in the town right next to ours. And so that's one of the reasons we moved to this part of Texas, to be closer to her as I take over some of those caregiving duties in the next 5 or 10 years, whenever they really need me. So we have served at churches in Pennsylvania and here in Texas. And when we were in Pennsylvania is when James got his autism diagnosis. And I realized that I had actually, because I had a sister with Down syndrome, I had always been in churches that welcomed people with disabilities until I had a son with a disability. And then I realized, oh, we don't do a great job of that at this church. And so we started a special needs ministry there, and then moved here to this church 3 years ago and started a ministry here. And so I've been part of starting things from the ground up in 2 different churches. The church in Pennsylvania was 150-ish people, and the church here is 350-ish. And so I'm a big proponent of small and medium-sized churches knowing that they can do special needs ministry just like the big guys. So that's a little bit of how I got into special needs ministry. Today we're really going to focus in on individualized spiritual plans, which is a term that I heard from Pastor Daniel, who is at First Baptist Houston. And a lot of people have used it, maybe using different terminology, but the idea of it is that similar to an IEP at school, we're creating goals specifically for the kids in our ministry. Now, all kids and youth have goals, right? Those who write the curriculum, like we get our curriculum from Lifeway. And so the writers of the curriculum at Lifeway have goals for the kids built into the curriculum. And so you come to church, and even though the kids may not know it, they are there to reach certain goals, and that's built into the curriculum. The thing that's different from my class is that my kids in my class, and I serve specifically in our sensory rooms, I have 6 kids who are consistent. They can't meet the goals in the same way their typical peers can. And so I have come up with different goals and adjusted those and really personalized them for each kid, so that when they come to church, they're not just there hanging out, they're not just being babysat, but that they have goals that they're meeting specifically for the needs that they have. So what we do is there's lots of ways to form the goals. You can talk to the parents, you can observe the kids, you can talk to the kids themselves. 2 of my 6 kids are verbal enough to agree, that say, yeah, we like these goals. These are good ideas for us. This is what we want to do when we come to church. And then my nonverbal kids, which includes my son, James, we do from observation, talking to the other parents to see what goals they have for the kids, And then hopefully all that comes together and really helps the kids meet the goals that we have and grow spiritually. That's the whole reason any of us go to church. So any questions so far? You can put them over in the chat, and Beth will make sure that I see them. Any questions about any of them? I'd like to share some of the goals we have, and this is included in the blog post that I wrote a couple weeks ago for Key Ministry. So you can go to keyministry.org and put in the search bar ISP, and it'll come up, and you can read the whole thing if you don't want to take notes, but I'll read for you the goals that we have.
And I also linked it. There's another place on our website where I linked it, so I'll talk about that later. So
okay, very good. Okay, so like I said, we have 6 kids in our special needs ministry who are in the sensory rooms. This is different from the kids who have buddies who are in the mainstream classes. And so of my 6 kids that I have, 2 are pretty verbal, 2 are a little bit verbal, and 2 are completely nonverbal. And so one of the things that I'm considering as I write these goals is, what are their abilities, what are their likes, dislikes, skills? All of that goes into writing the goals. And so the goals that I have for, I'll start with our 2 most verbal kiddos. So here are his spiritual goals. And this is really about what the teacher is helping these kids do. This isn't a pass or fail. They're not getting graded on this, right? It's just, okay, as a teacher, when I come into the classroom, I've got 6 different kids with different levels of abilities, and I need to know what these kids are able to do and what I can help them do. So for our most verbal kids, the goals are, and I'm just going to use first names. I know we're recording, but so that's the only identifying information I'll give. The spiritual goal is for Tommy to hear that Jesus loves him, for him to repeat a Bible verse, a memory verse each week, for him to pray with prompting. And so that usually comes at snack time, right? That's our most popular time to pray. For him to complete an activity sheet each week, and we do that together. And for him to learn the words and motions of the songs we sing. So a lot of that, you see, falls on the teacher knowing, okay, so it's the teacher, it's my job as the teacher to make sure that Thomas hears today that Jesus loves him. That's a goal that I want to meet as a teacher so that it gets met in his life. And then I've got to model prayer for him so he can do that with some prompting. We do the worksheet together, the little activity sheet. We do that actually while we're eating snack too, because I've got their full attention and they're sitting at the table. And so doing the worksheet together is a goal. And I have some parents who they want to see that worksheet, that activity sheet at the end of our time together because they want to know what we've been working on. And so we make sure that we do that as a group, and then those go home with the parents. And so those are for my 2 kids who are the most verbal. Those are the goals that I have for them.
So what I love about, well, I love so many things about this, and Joanna has also said she loves your goals. I love that this also empowers the volunteers that you may have in your classroom. And I know many of us work with numerous volunteers, and some are, trained special ed teachers, but many are not. And I think this really gives them, really helps them have a mission, a purpose, and really understand like why we're all there, and they can help the child work towards those goals. So I love this. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's especially true, Beth, and we'll talk about like our kids who are completely nonverbal. The ones specifically in my ministry are also in wheelchairs. And so some of my volunteers who don't have experience with that, they just love kids. And so they're going to come in and serve the kids that I serve. They don't know what to do or what to expect or how to act. And so some of this goal setting is really just modeling for all the volunteers, this is how we love and care for these kids. So, and we actually, we'll probably talk about this more because I'll share the whole sheet, but we have these goals posted in the classroom. And so when a volunteer comes in, we have information sheets about each kid, and this is included in their information sheet. So it's easy, even if it's a new volunteer that's just been through training and maybe not can't match up all the names with all the kids right away, we also have their pictures on the forms, and so they know right away what those kids will be working on that week. Okay, so I'll share, and I'll use, this is my son James, these are his goals. So he is moderately verbal, so he can answer like yes or no questions, but he can't carry on a conversation. And so we have two kids, James and another boy, who are very similar ability levels. And so his goals are that he will hear that Jesus loves him, that he will repeat a Bible memory verse, that he will pray with prompting, that he will identify by name friends and helpers at church, and he will learn the words and motions to the songs that we sing. And so if you have like an education background where you know, okay, I've got to pull in my visual learners and my kinetic learners and all that, I try to cover a lot of that too with the goals. So like music time is important because James is very musical. He loves to sing. Yeah, Sweet Caroline is one of his favorite songs. He's got quite eclectic taste, but what's really cool is when he just pops up with a worship song or a song that he's heard in Sunday school, and that's an encouragement to mom and to dad and to everybody who gets to hear him. And so music time is an important time in our classroom each Sunday, and it's fun for all the kids to learn the songs, learn the motions. And even, you know, some of them are wearing noise reducing headphones, so it's at a level that's comfortable for them, but that's an important goal for all of our kids. So that's a fun one. And then the goals that I have for our kids who are completely nonverbal, and the ones that we specifically have are also in wheelchairs. And so their goals are that they will hear that Jesus loves them. They will participate in music time. They will look at books and pictures that go along with our Bible story, and they will be asked to identify people with hand-over-hand prompting help. They will put together puzzles that go along with the Bible story, so they're able to sit with us at the table, and then with their helpers and buddies, they're identifying, you know, where's Jesus? Jesus is in our story today. Here he is. And so we're pointing and helping them track their eyesight to see what's in the picture, and then do those puzzles. And the puzzles are like 4 pieces, you know, cut out from the curriculum. And so they're just putting together those 4 pieces. And all of the kids do that, but it's just a very specific goal for those 2 kids that we have. They get to be, so my 2 that are the most verbal, they're focusing a lot on that activity sheet. My 2 who are less verbal are focusing on that puzzle during our at the table time. And so you can see how each kid gets to do what they enjoy the most and what they're able to do, and still get encouraged to grow in their spirituality and what God has to teach them, because it fits what they need really well.
I love that. Thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with these goals, and maybe give some examples on, did you work with the parents? Did you work with the volunteers?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think any way there's no wrong way to do it. Mine mostly came from observation, because I've had these same 6 kids for at least 1.5 years. And so I know what they enjoy doing, what they struggle with. And so I was able to put the goals together and then run them by the parents and say, do you have anything you want to add, or do you want to take anything away? And we didn't have that with the parents that we have. One thing that was really interesting is I have one of the kids in our ministry is being raised by his grandmother, and she is having trouble accepting that he has a special needs diagnosis, okay? So he's in special ed at school, but she thought that he should be in the mainstream typical class at church, and that he was getting in trouble and being punished and then being taken to our class as a punishment, okay? So I had to go through and have lots of conversations with her, and what convinced her to let him come in my class was the ISP. Because I said, look, when he's in the typical class, because the gap between what he can do and what his typical peers can do is getting wider as he gets older. I mean, it was okay in the first and second grade class, but in the third and fourth grade class, they're not playing games. They're sitting down more, and he was just really struggling. And so I said, when he comes into my class, here's what I expect from him. I expect that he will do these 5 or 6 things. And once she realized that he was meeting the goals that she had for him too in my class, that convinced her that it was the right fit for him. Instead of being in that typical class where the teachers were meeting the needs of all the other kids, and he often got sidelined or got in trouble, because he was talking when he wasn't supposed to be talking, or getting out of his seat. Those kind of like behavioral things were happening in the other class, but they don't happen in my class because everything is tailored to what he needs and what his strengths and weaknesses are. And so working with the parents is a great idea. Working with the kids, if they're able to verbalize what they want their goals to be. Like with my 2 who get to pray at snack time, I say, hey, here's what prayer is, and we're going to learn how to pray, and this is why it's important. Is that something you want to work on while you're here at church? Yeah, that sounds great. We want to do that. And so it helps them feel like they're part of the process of setting these goals for themselves too. And so I mainly took the lead on it. My helpers helped, the parents had input, and even the kids got to say who are able, got to give input on the goals too.
That's great. So in case you weren't taking notes, but you think, okay, this is something I want to try, Catherine has put the link to the article, to the blog post in the chat. And for those of you who are watching the recording later, it'll be listed with this recording. So I'm just curious, have any of you out there been using this type of idea? Or do you see this as something you might want to try to do? Yeah, so Tammy, you've been using it, or you're gonna try?
No, I've been using it. We actually, I was an occupational therapist in schools. So I took our accommodation plan and made it so that it worked here. And part of our accommodation plan is individualized spiritual goal for each of our kids. So that's something that we've been doing. And then we take our accommodation plan and we shrink it down, and we take the pertinent information off of it and put it into a snapshot, and then put them in like lanyard holders, and our volunteers can take it with them, so that if they have a different volunteer one week, that volunteer then knows what their goals are and what other information that they need to know about the child in order to be able to best support them.
So the volunteer is wearing the lanyard with the child's information.
Yeah.
That's a very clever way to keep it kind of private and yet very accessible.
Right. Yes.
I love that. So Tammy, do you have any ISP goals that are different than the ones that Sandra mentioned?
No, other than for sharing the gospel, we use the wordless book. And so for kids that are just emerging in their understanding of what the colors even are, that might be a goal, that they're able to identify the colors of the wordless book. And then from there, we attach a word to each color. So gold is God's love or heaven, white is clean, all of those. And then eventually, depending on how they're, what level of learning they're at, we'll add the verses that correspond to the wordless book. And so that's the only difference, is that I think we can have some things more concrete. And then we also have something called the DL Top 12. There are 12 verses that are part of our children's curriculum, and that might be a goal that we have. So they're just a little more specific, but I love the pray with prompting. We've been working on that with our kids in our classroom, and that's not something that I've added to their goals. So that's a really good one.
Great, thank you. We have 2 comments in the chat that involving the kids, like that's wonderful. Samantha loves that you've included the kids in making their goals, and Laura said, that she thinks involving the kids and parents as much as possible is so important. So, good. Thank you. Would anybody else like to comment, either with questions or you're doing this, would like to do this? And I'll try to, we've got a couple screens now worth of people, so I'm gonna raise your hand or unmute yourself and speak out. I'll try to find you.
I had a couple questions about the ISP way that you have goals for them. Is that set up with the parent individually after they have registered for your program? Like, is that an individual conversation, or is this a part of your like intake form?
Well, I don't usually set the goals until I know the kiddos pretty well. And so we would talk about that in the intake process and say, hey, here's what this is one of the things we do in this ministry. We set these goals. If you have any suggestions, we would love to hear them. And we'll check in with you in 3 or 4 weeks when we know your kiddo better. And we'll share the goals that we think, that we're going to start with. And then we'll get your feedback on what you think of the goals. But usually it takes a little bit, especially for, and I'm talking about my kids, so I'm not talking about, but like for him to get comfortable in a new place takes a few weeks. So as a teacher, I might not even know what his skills and abilities and likes and dislikes are until we can help him feel as comfortable as possible at church. And so I don't think it's a bad thing to take a few weeks and try different goals out and see what works, and then talk about it with the parents in a little bit.
Yeah, and Joanna in the chat is agreeing that probably taking a little bit, she said, thank you for providing the timeline, taking some time before you come up with the goals. But Lindsay, thank you for bringing up the intake process, because one of the things that we want to address today is a subject of intake forms. So show of hands, how many of you are currently using an intake form as part of your, let's say, Sunday morning special needs ministry? So I see a lot of hands up here. Okay, so I have an example of questions that one church, my church, uses for on our intake form. So I'm just going to run through them. These are suggestions, and then we can discuss how they're used and why they're used. But obviously the child's name and the parent's contact information and all that, that's clearly going to be on there. So the first question I always ask is, please share a few of the things you love about your child and what makes them special. A lot of times parents don't get asked that. And so I know a lot of you already do this, but really start this conversation off on the right foot. I mean, we want to welcome the family and, just start off with a great relationship with the whole family. What activities does your child enjoy? What activities or environments might upset your child? What can we do to comfort your child? Then we get into some of the more medical questions. Is your child prone to seizures? If yes, please elaborate. Does your child have allergies? If yes, please elaborate. Are there foods/drinks we should not give your child? And by the way, these are all posted on the Key Ministry website. Please indicate special toileting needs/schedule. What is your child's understanding of God/relationship with Christ? Please tell us about your child's communication skills. Does your child, does your child use any assistive devices, walker, wheelchair, communication device? Please describe any adverse behaviors that we should be aware of and how they are being addressed at home or school. Are there behavior plans or tools that you'd like to share with us to maintain consistency between home, school, and church? And any additional information you'd like to share. So, Lindsay said my favorite question. So was that the first one? Yeah, mine too. So that's the list. That's just a sample of questions, a sample list of questions. What other questions do you include, or which one of these would you not include? And anyone can unmute themselves and join in.
we ask toileting questions
Mhm.
to make sure that we know what the child needs and the process for that. So
more
that's,
specifically than, like, do you give them choice? Like I says, please indicate special toileting needs / schedule. Do you get more specific or just let
yeah,
them?
ours is more like a checklist. So it's
Okay,
like toileting needs, and then there's 5 things they can check from,
got it.
and then there's an other. And
Yeah.
so that just seems to be
Yeah.
an important thing that that we need to know.
Yes. And Michelle, yeah, we do need to know. And Michelle has asked, has said in the chat, the great debate to ask for diagnosis or not. So I do not. I am more interested in what kind of environment we can create for the child to make it a successful experience for them. And so I do not ask for diagnosis. How about the rest of you? What do you do? Would anybody like to share?
We don't ask for diagnosis either, but we are, if they want to share it, they can. If they want to put that somewhere on the form, that would leave it up to them, but we're not going to specifically ask unless they decide to let us know.
Yeah, I would say half the parents actually do share it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Michelle said that she has removed it from her updated form. Debbie does not ask for a diagnosis, but she finds that once the conversation begins and they feel comfortable, they usually say, yeah. Sandra, as a mom, what's your feeling?
Well, I mean, James is level 3 autism. So, I mean, you see that really easily. So I think for us, I remember when he was first diagnosed, even saying the word autism was hard for me. And so one of the things that I tried to do in ministry is just have one point person, so that like if a visitor is coming, that the parent doesn't have to repeat my child is autistic, or to the children's minister, and then to me, and then to the worker. I mean, like, we try to decrease how much communication they're required to give, so they don't have to tell the children's minister a diagnosis. They just say, hey, I think my kid would be a good fit in the sensory room.
Right.
And then they have a conversation with me, and I can say, well, my son James has autism. He's also, he's got like 7 diagnoses when you look at all of them. So that opens up the conversation. It's not necessary, but for me specifically, I don't mind sharing that, because I feel like the words help the people around him know how to serve him better. And so this helps communicate what his challenges are. But like I said, I have a level 3 kid. And so if I had a level 1 kid, or ADD or ADHD, I might be more sensitive to who I said that to, or my kid himself may be
right
telling me what he wants shared about him.
And I have had volunteers ask me what a child's particular diagnosis is. And I mean, that's another reason why I don't ask. I don't think any of us have to know what the diagnosis is in order to best serve the child. So we're getting a lot of chat on this. So some parents are sharing. You just learn to know what works for someone. Awareness of diagnosis is important only to an extent. So people seem to agree with that. Okay, great. What else? Who else that is using an intake form, and how are you using it? When does it happen online? Does it happen in person? And also, I'm curious what you do with the information once you have it. Would anybody like to share?
I actually think this is such a great topic for me, because I hadn't actually thought of it. I'm a parent of a special needs child, so it seems like information that I just so often give to school, to people who care for him, or, other learning environments and that type of thing. It was often a conversation. So I didn't really think about parents who enter this who may just feel like this is just a better fit. So I did have some questions on the intake about the mental age of your child, and also like a diagnosis, medical condition, and learning difference. And I kind of cringe now hearing all of this that I asked this. So I guess I still kind of hear it as important, but I love that the care is just because we care. It isn't because of a certain thing. So is there a better way to word this, or would we suggest completely taking this out because it really doesn't benefit the way we do church?
So do you mean like I guess I think of it as like, how does your child learn best, or what, like what environment best suits your child, that type of thing?
Yeah. So right now we are working, this is all new to our church. We are just about to open our special needs program. So I'm new to, we've started with some families I have relationship with already inside of our rooms. And so our intake form is rather fresh. And so I think in posing those questions about either the mental age or the like diagnosis and that kind of thing was, I think like now what I'm understanding is I could ask that in a different way of, do you think your child would best fit an integrated thing, or would they better serve in the sensory room alone? Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing I can ask this different instead of in a way parents might feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and actually Michelle just, right before you said that, Michelle put in the chat that you could ask, would your child benefit from a buddy, sensory room, or combination? So yeah, you guys are on the same wavelength there.
Thank you.
So Al, who is with Liquid Church, and they have a pretty large program, is saying the intake is online and mandatory to complete before a child can enter the special needs ministry in order to get an appropriate buddy. So that's how they're using theirs. There's some discussion in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Catherine.
You finish, and then I've got a couple things.
Okay. So Becca is saying she asked parents, there's so much going on in the chat. Okay, she asked parents if there's a diagnosis they feel they need to know about and explain they can share whatever they are comfortable with. She's also the parent of a nonverbal child with CP and intellectual disabilities, and sometimes she needs permission to give the long explanation of his diagnosis. She likes opening that door of conversation in case parents need permission and a safe place to process their child's diagnosis. And that sounds kind of similar to what Sandra was saying as well. Everybody, I think, agrees that once that relationship develops, more information can be shared. And Joanna says, I think the questions you want to ask parents serve multiple purposes. You want to make the parents feel comfortable leaving their children with adequate support, and you want to be able to share important info with volunteers who are serving so they can successfully work with the class. That's what comes to mind. Michelle's form is required before the child has a buddy or use of the sensory room as well. There's a question, can you ask about physical/medical limitations? Does anybody want to address that? I guess my rule of thumb is, if it's something I need to know in order to make sure the person is safe and has a successful, like the environment is successful for them, then I think you need to ask it. Do people agree? Do you have any comments on that? Yeah. Debbie?
Yeah, if people are signing up, pre-registering online, there's a form that they can fill out, and it talks about how what information do we need to know about your child, along with the things that you've been talking about. what do we need to know about your child to make sure that they have a safe and happy, successful day with us? And then I always call and then get more information so they feel comfortable. We've talked about where they go and that kind of stuff. If they come to church for the first time on a Sunday morning, then as the person is taking their information to register them, one of the things they ask after allergies is, does your child have any other special needs that you think we need to know about? And then they, especially the more severely affected children, they always talk about that. Then they call me. And so I go meet the family, and we go to a little quiet place, and I meet their child and have a little interview about that day. You know, how can we serve Johnny today? And then I tell them that this week I'm going to call you and we'll talk more about Johnny, and you can tell me all the things he loves and how he communicates. But let's just make it through today and serve him. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And Catherine, I'm going to mute myself for a little bit. I've got a lot of background noise here. They're unloading groceries.
Okay. Well, Sylvia, you had your hand up. Is there something you wanted to say?
Yes. Our intake actually comes, like Debbie said, when if it's a new family that first comes into the church, because we use Fellowship 1, they have to register for security reasons. They have to register for whatever church environment they are choosing for that particular Sunday. And whether they're going to a typicals class or whether they're coming to the class that serves the special needs children. And when they get there, we have an intake form that they can take with them to fill out. It's not a question that we ask immediately. The question that they have to answer for me is, how can we best serve you today? Until we figure out, and I too am an occupational therapist, so I can make a determination as to, and sometimes I just tell the parent, well, let's just try him in here. If you decide that that's where you want him to be, or her, or you would like for them to be in a more integrated classroom, we will assign a buddy and we will go with them, whether we need to stay the whole time or whether that teacher in that other class can handle them. And we can do it in increments. It's definitely on an individual basis. And sometimes the parent will register the child for a typicals class, and we have it set up so the teacher of that typicals class can call me if they are having and noticing certain behaviors that are atypical for the other kids in the class, and I will go and do an observation that day, but have told them that they are never to say to a parent that your child is XYZ, because you are not a qualified examiner for making that decision. You can say how that behavior impacted you and your class that day, and then we will make that determination.
Those are all excellent things. And I just want to throw out here, the reason why I jumped in is that, you know, it seems like one of the questions that comes up in special needs ministry or in ministry in general with kids is, you know, there's this kid and I don't know exactly what to do with this kid. Well, we actually did a video roundtable discussion on that last fall with Diane Kim, and she had some great tips on how to approach a family, you know, particularly if there's not a diagnosis, but boy, there's a lot of behaviors and the child is just not succeeding in the regular classroom. So I'm going to share the link to the video on our Vimeo channel in the chat So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up on that, and we can share that in the description of the recording afterwards as well. And then last thing from me, a couple folks have been commenting in the chat, that they ask, what are your child's special needs, and gives the parent the choice to answer, whether it's a drop down or a list of options or drop down type box online. So, it might be poor attention, impulsive, what have you. So then, they could choose to share a diagnosis or not. And then also, what calming techniques work for your child if your child is overstimulated? That can be a piece of information that teachers or buddies can have. Anybody else have something they'd like to share?
I think the groceries are unloaded now. I totally forgot I was on this. Sandra, how do you use your intake form with your, do you have other volunteers in your classroom, or are you it?
No, I try not to be it as often as possible, because I also serve as, I'm the pastor's wife too, and last summer there were like 3 or 4 months that I didn't make it to church because I was with our special needs ministry, and so we had to put some things in place to where I could make it to church more often. So one of the things that we do so after we do the intake form, we make a profile sheet, which I think is similar to the lanyard idea, but ours are posted in the classroom because our sensory classroom, not everybody goes in there. And so we have like a picture of the kid, his parents' names, the cell number in case we have to text pretty quickly to get to them. Then we list allergies or medical issues. So if anything that the child's allergic to, or something that we would need to know, like epilepsy, those kind of things. And then I list the things that they like, they dislike, their spiritual goals, any additional information. And then I list their schedule, because like a lot of you, some of our kids are in the sensory room full time, some are in, but like some of our kids go back and forth. So they're in the big church kids with the other typical kids for like music and big time, but then when they break into their smaller groups, we're the smaller group that they break into. And so the schedule is posted so that way my volunteers know, oh, this kid is coming in at 10:30, even though they're not here at 10, those kind of things. And like under additional information for James, that could be like anything that helps him calm down quickly, or for him, he was going through a time where he felt like he had to go to the bathroom 10 times or 12 times because he was trying to just take control, right? That's the one thing he has control over in his environment. And so he would ask to go to the bathroom 10, 12, 15 times. And so I had to tell my helpers, just say yes, like just let him do that. And so I put that information on there. Goes frequently, but independently. And so those kind of things can change. I mean, like this piece of paper on the wall isn't permanent or laminated, right? Like it doesn't have to be that far, but it's just helpful information, especially if it's like, hey, this is my first time helping in here, or like we have fifth Sunday helpers who are only there on the fifth Sunday. So they're only seeing these kids 4 times a year or 5 times a year. And so they need that information pretty quickly. And then having the likes and the dislikes on there, that comes right from the intake form, the things that they, if they're sensitive to noise, if, like we have one kid who hates goldfish, but James eats all of her goldfish. So it works out okay. But anything like that, that helps just give like just a snapshot. So it's pretty quick information, but it's handy for them.
So I like that you brought up the fact, so this is not like engraved in stone. Right. And I suspect that whenever it is that we all go back to, being in person on Sunday mornings, we're going to kind of need to start this over again, because I have a feeling things aren't going to just snap right back into normal. And I suspect that all of our kids are going to probably be a little bit different, and we're probably going to lose some volunteers and hopefully gain some volunteers when we're all back. So I suspect we'll all need to be thinking about these intake forms again. I want to mention something in the chat, but Tony, I just wanted to make sure, did you get your question answered?
Yeah, I was just since we do physical fitness, I think sometimes it might be important to say, does he have any restrictions that, any major restrictions does the person have?
Right, and definitely for your application, you definitely need to know some of the physical restrictions, since yours is an exercise based.
Right, but on the other hand, a lot of times parents will say, well, he can't do this, and I'm thinking like to myself, why not? Of course you can, if we work with him. So, with a medical, you want to know if there's any medical things like that, but you don't want to limit the kid.
Sure, absolutely. I love what Becca has said in here, and I think this was addressing a question that we had earlier, but she has an occupational therapist background as well. There are a lot of you on this particular Zoom. So she tries to do a little bit of investigating by asking what the child likes to play with at home, what they are currently learning in school, and favorite TV shows / books, etc., because those questions usually give her an idea of a child's age equivalent level of learning. So I think that's a great way to, to get at the answer you're trying to get at, which is, how can I best teach this child, like what level, or what, not level, but what method of learning does this child do best with? Carrie says they're an inclusive ministry and do not have a separate sensory room or classroom. So she's wondering how others match up volunteers with kids who have needs. Is it when an intake form is completed? What do you do for volunteers for kids who have needs but do not have an intake form? And I would guess that probably most of us have those kids. Like Catherine mentioned, there's this kid. So where you're hearing from your volunteers that, hey, we need some help here. So there's probably not an intake form for that kid. So does anybody have any examples of what they do in that situation, how they match up a volunteer?
I use teen volunteers because a lot of our kids just see that as, hey, there's this cool teenager who wants to hang out with me, and that's a lot of fun. And so I will meet the teenager at the door and say, hey, so-and-so really seems to be struggling with this today, staying in her seat, not talking out. And so I may not even necessarily have somebody assigned to, like, some kids get an assigned buddy, but I almost have a floater each Sunday. And so when the floater comes, I tell that floater, this is the kiddo who needs a little extra help today. And so just hang close and here's what to watch for. So, but if it's a kid you don't know and you're like, that floater buddy is really helpful. So I can just plug them in wherever the need is the greatest. And because, we all, back in normal time, our kids, consistency is hard, especially with these younger parents. And so I could have, 3 buddies available, but only one kid who needs a buddy. And so training them all to kind of fill that floater role is helpful for us.
Mm-hmm. And I think you brought up a really good point that reminded me that this kid that might need a little extra assistance. And so you're telling a teen, hey, so-and-so just needs a little help, sitting still today or whatever it is. That's such an excellent example of, we don't care if there's a diagnosis or what the diagnosis is. And that teen certainly doesn't need to know if and what the diagnosis is. They just need to know, like, what kind of environment to create to help that child have a successful morning. So I'm just going to reiterate that. Okay. Let's see. Tony asked if we could see examples of intake forms and ISPs. Absolutely. Yes, you may. They are on the Key Ministry website. So here's where you're going to go to look for those. You go to keyministry.org and click on the For Churches tab. There are resources that are listed, and one of the resources is it's called Get Started. It's Launching and Growing a Special Needs and Disability Ministry. There are resources listed under there. So there's steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then additional resources. If you click on additional resources, you'll see a link to Sandra's blog post, and you'll see a link to sample questions for an intake form. And Catherine has thankfully posted it in there, and it's a lot quicker just to click on that link. Let's see, what else did I miss? So Lisa's another one with occupational therapy background. So she'll observe the child over several weeks and then write a plan to guide the volunteer buddy as well as help the child be more successful in a typical setting. They have a transition plan for students who no longer need the accommodations of their special space classroom, and they do involve the parents in the process. Becca says that her background noise for teens are too loud. I can appreciate that, Becca. That's why she's chatting with us in the chat and not in person. So Al says, when we check on our son every Sunday, the person usually asks how he's been doing that day. We try to keep them posted on how he slept, etc., to give the leaders a heads up. Yeah, and that's good, because some kids, it really does vary week to week depending on if they ate breakfast or how they slept or whatever. So that's great. All right, any last minute thoughts or questions?
I kind of wanted to comment on Sandra's a floater idea, going back to Carrie's comment on a full inclusion type setup. We always, I like the substitute floater idea. We always call it the fly on the wall person. Like, hey, we're going to send this other adult or teen or this helper out into your room, but we don't want you to think that we'll tell the teacher, but we don't want the other kids to think, hey, we are here for this kid or this adult, however the setup may be. We also always have to remind the teachers, we're not another staff in the room. We're just there that day, navigating the situation and how we can help the best. We are, we'll collaborate with the other teachers saying, hey, we are here for John today, but we're not going to make it so obvious that we're the one focusing on him and helping out today. Constant reminders.
Thumbs up on that one, Derek. Thank you. Yeah. There's a question in the chat. How often do you meet with parents to reevaluate needs? I know some of you are doing it on an annual basis, like kind of when the start of your, usually kind of related to the school year, when your children's ministry either, I know some of you get the summer off. Well, we all got the summer off. But when kids sometimes transition to a new classroom, I think we're all going to have to do it once we are finally back in person. Do any of you do it on a more frequent basis, more than annually? Okay, Debbie says it depends on the child and how often we see the parents. Yeah. And sometimes, I've had parents tell me that that the child is on, new meds, and so it's kind of means very different behaviors or that type of thing. So we've definitely, reevaluated some things based on whatever's going on with a particular child at the time. All right, well, hey, I've learned a lot today. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sandra, for sharing what you've been up to and your resources. And I do invite you all to check out keyministry.org, click on the events tab to see we have some other webinars coming up. And we are also still doing our Monday at noon Eastern time idea share. So I know several of you that are on today have been part of that each week, but you're invited to join us. it's a discussion like this, and we've basically been talking about how to do ministry during the pandemic. So we've been meeting since like March, basically, and we're still helping each other, coming up with ideas. So again, that's on the events page. Derek says that he just ordered several copies of your book, Sandra, and can't wait to start reading it and then sharing his copies. So yay. So I invite you to go to sandrapeoples.com. Is that right? Yes. Okay. And check that out. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody. This recording will be up very soon. And we do this roundtable on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.